All right. Hello, Amelia.
Hello, Chuck.
How are you
Welcome.
today?
I'm good. Happy
So,
Monday.
happy Monday. We're welcoming everybody to our first podcast today, episode 000.
The revival. 000.
If episode one is 000, I guess that means our podcast has absolutely no value whatsoever.
To the 0 to the 1,000th degree. That's where we're going to start.
That's right. You got to start somewhere.
So, we are the conversations with the enlightened ex religious leader and the sexy hippie mom of six talking about the revived life. And we would like to say a quick shout out and thank you to my husband Dalen, who helped us write our tagline and come up
Yay.
with our adjectives.
Thank you, Dalen. It's all your fault.
Thanks, Dalen, for the sexy mom of six. Definitely made me blush, but I was like, well,
Let's
why
just go.
not? Okay, sure.
Okay, fine.
If you say so. I don't want to brag. And you are our enlightened ex religious leader. And so I'm looking forward to getting into your story. I'm sure that's.
Yeah, we both got a lot of stories to share over these next bunch of episodes, I think, of just crazy stuff that hopefully, as a result of our conversations, will encourage and inspire some people.
Yeah, yeah. So we just wanted to take this opportunity for our first episode to kind of share like why we're starting the revival. I don't know if we're planning on telling the story, the
Probably,
story of how I think you maybe had to have been there.
yeah, we'd have to sanitize it so much and pull out so much. Let's just stick with we came up with an idea.
We had okay. So we came up with an idea. This idea for the revival podcast is probably what, like 3 whole weeks old.
Right, right.
And Chuck and his wife Trisha and Dalen and I, we have all been friends for many, many years. And we'll go into that a little bit. But Chuck and I both trade in the market. He's a Forex trader and I trade stock options. So we'll talk every like 3 to 6 months to check in, shed a few tears, have a few victories, or whatever. So our last conversation was when the revival podcast idea came up, and I was like, "Oh yes, this is going to happen. It's just too easy. It's too easy not to just press record and share from our life experiences. So we're making it happen."
And let's just say I was in a happy state of mind that day. I was very happy. And it kind of came out of that. So this whole idea of revival, we talked about revive. We went through a lot of different kind of name changes, or not changes, but just trying to figure out which one fit. So for you, what is that? What is that whole? What's the vibe of revival? What's that about?
Well, let me ask you a question. What's the? Let me flip that back on you. You first. I think that this is what I'm thinking about the Revival podcast. It's a conversation on the revived life. That's how we've created the tagline. But we are not, and I am not under any impression that we are actually starting this conversation. This conversation is happening. And I think that there is a huge movement going on right now towards consciousness and mindfulness and awakening and all of these really great terms and ideas that people are embracing. But I think that sometimes for a lot of people, like the actual like steps and how to can be a little bit difficult to manage. So for instance, some people will say like, oh, you're being held back by your negative beliefs, which is true, except a lot of people don't even recognize what their negative beliefs are or how to even distill them from like the everyday noise that they're having. And so I think that our conversation has a lot to do with sort of breaking that down and giving people something that they can chew on or put in their pocket and actually use in their personal process of growth and self-transformation and just bringing more light and love into their life. So I'm excited about the revive and revival because it is a regeneration of sort of like maybe old thinking or old ways of doing things. And how then shall we live when we're ready for a change is what we're all about.
Right. And it's sometimes that transition is hard. Uh, and
Yeah,
we're not, like you said, we're not creating these conversations really. We're kind of tapping into the flow of conversations that people are having every day who are coming from different backgrounds. They're letting go of a lot of old stuff. But a lot of times people don't know how to let go, or they won't let go of one thing until they have something else. It's like, this isn't serving me anymore, but I don't really know what to hold on to yet. And so they don't let go of this in order to embrace something else because they don't know what else to embrace yet. And
right.
so some of our conversations, I'm sure, will spark some ideas on how to do that.
Yeah,
Especially as a mom of, as a sexy mom of six. Uh, how do you think that maybe being a mom of six, that conversation emerges out of that context?
the conversation for motherhood or for like revival.
I think revival. Yeah, the revival, but
Oh my gosh. Um, it emerges constantly, I think, because, well, I'm at a place right now where my youngest is 4, so I'm kind of out of the more really acute phase of motherhood, where it's just
wait a
like
minute. How many do you have that are teenagers?
one and one more on the way. So
Okay,
we're
so
just we have
you move out of one acute phase into another one. So go ahead.
absolutely. I know. Yeah. I'm no dummy, but yeah, so like I have a ton of experience with babies and toddlers, but I'm brand new when it comes to these like older kid years, which you have experience in that area, so thankfully. I think that for me, being done with having like babies and toddlers and maybe getting just a little bit more space from that season of my life has given me an opportunity to come up for air. And I was in that season for about a dozen years. And so coming up for air has put me more in touch, or has put me in a place where I'm wanting to be more in touch with like, well, who's Amelia and what is her purpose and what does she have to offer and what light can I bring? And so, yeah, this is all very relevant. We are not Mr. Answer or Mrs. Answer for our listeners. We are very much on the journey as well. And I think that for both of us, just having an opportunity to articulate and kind of even hash out where we are currently is going to be a great exercise
So
for
really,
us
it's about,
personally.
this is about us.
I'm not going to lie. I really think I'm going to get something out of this.
I mean, just like our conversations before, you
Yeah.
know, we just talk about whatever struggles we're going through, the process of letting go and holding on to new things, and as we've talked through that in the past, you know, I always come away going, huh, well, I didn't see it like that, and I didn't think about it like that, and so I think our listeners will do the same thing as well.
Yeah.
And we're not about like you said, we're not really interested in fixing anybody.
Right.
You know, the only person that I'm responsible for is myself, and I'm not really good at that most of the time. Not into
Yeah.
fixing people, but there's something about your story or my story or just hearing different perspectives on things that I think helps other people as a byproduct, and so that part we're
Yeah.
excited about.
And we're absolutely like a cheer team, I think. So for anybody out there who's ever gotten into the Enneagram, Chuck and I are both 9s on the Enneagram. So that probably says a lot if you're into that. Like we're both peacemakers. We both see things from a lot of different perspectives. We're both pretty analytical. And we both really love people. And so it is definitely an honor that anybody would tune in to listen and give us the opportunity just to cheer them on or maybe resonate with something that they're going through and encourage them. Like that would be such an honor for me to be able to uh, be like cheer squad.
Go
Yay!
world.
Woo-hoo! Revival, revival.
Revival. And we've got a lot of I think what'll make the conversation interesting in the long run too is that we have a lot of similarities, but we've got a lot of differences too. So you guys live in the mountains. We live on the beach. You have 6 kids. My dad was divorced 6 times. Does that count for?
The numbers work. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Uh, but I'm sure having the mom perspective, the ex-pastor, ex-religious figure kind of perspective, I think that'll create a lot of healthy interaction and perspective as well that people will find interesting.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting into our stories. We're going to do episodes where we interview each other and sort of dive into our stories. I personally think Chuck has incredibly interesting and fascinating stories, and I just have a whole bunch of kids.
Oh, that's quite a story.
It's quite the
Every
story.
single day it's a new story because the dynamics of what I can't even imagine managing 6 kids and loving them and then thinking, my God, what was I thinking? And
Never.
then I love them again. You know, the inner dynamics of that were
Yeah.
probably pretty awesome. And you kind of came from, without giving your story away that much, but you came from kind of you went through a religious phase into now being a little bit more open about things, and I think that will uh, be helpful. It's helpful for me to hear your story because it helped me along the journey with my story as well.
Yeah, well, like you had said about that thing, like it's hard to let go of something when you're not sure what's latching on. Well, there is a bit of a dark abyss in
In
between
the
that
middle.
places. And I was in that place when we were at your church, I think probably like 5 or 6 years ago. That was when Karis was a baby. And I remember kind of going through this process of deleting a lot of the things that weren't really serving me in my faith anymore, just kind of having a lot of conversations with you and Trisha. But then we would have meetings at your house and I would just be like, yeah, I don't get it. Like, I was like really trying to get some things to click for me and you're very, very patient, but I was feeling very lost. And we talked about that. I was just feeling really, really lost. And then I know that once I kind of made my way through that, you had your own time where you were feeling like really, really lost. And you're
Yeah,
like, how
I
did
just
you just transition so gracefully? And I'm like, do you remember how pissed I was in your living room trying to be like, I don't get it. Don't get any of it.
but you did it with such style and calm, and you didn't like pull your hair out and go have run off with the pool guy, and you didn't do anything crazy, which a lot of times that happens.
Yeah.
Even to use a biblical story, even though it's not my thing anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole, I think it's Peter and John, Jesus dies in the story, and they go back to fishing. A lot of times when people transition from major frameworks of seeing the world when they're coming out of that, it's a pretty dark valley. They go back to whatever they did before. If sometimes addictions, sometimes ways of relating to life because they don't have, again, anything to hold on to.
Right.
And having a great spouse helps.
Yes.
and fr-
And
and friends who are going through that too was very helpful for me and Trisha. My wife seemed to have transitioned, like, I think she privately did that because I was still pastoring and she was going through a lot of this internally.
Mhm.
And I can imagine the pressure she must have felt with, my husband is a pastor, but I don't believe these things anymore.
Mhm.
And so she had to internally just deal with that until she finally came out of it, but had to be kind of stuck between, being in that role and me not being where she was yet. So I'm real thankful for her and her perseverance internally to process all that. A lot of
Yeah.
a lot of it is processing.
Yeah. No, she's got a lot of strength. I I've been really thankful, I've always been like a very spiritual person even before I was like a Christian in my teenage years. And I'm just such a seeker like that. Like that's a very real realm to me. But or also I'm thankful to have so many kids because I feel like having 6 kids is put my feet so firmly on the earth's surface that, I can't just like drift off into woo-woo land with all of these, spiritual philosophies and ideas. I have got to have something that actually works in the grind of my daily life, because
Right.
that is very real. And there are people who are counting on me, and I can't just have like a crisis and fall off the earth. And I mean,
I've got responsibilities.
I got shit I have to do. But I think it's like provided for me a real balance, because I do love spiritual things, and the pursuit and the asking and the philosophizing, those types of things. But at the end of the day, whatever it is that I'm concluding, or whatever the truth is that I seek, it just has to work with my actual life, because the stakes are pretty high. And it is so important to me to do a good job with my family and with my kids, that I don't want to just like fall off the earth. But man, we have been through some difficult things. So I don't know. Thank you for your polite thing. Like, you never freaked out. We'll have to ask Dalen and see if he has the same exact story.
Maybe we should reframe that as, you never freaked out in public or on social media. So, I mean, that's the real world, isn't it?
That's the world, right? Yeah. Well, I think that has to do with like vulnerability not being my strongest suit, which is one of the things I love about the podcast, is because just an opportunity to talk it out, and like, in this kind of a setting, I think really helps me personally be more vulnerable than writing a post or putting the camera on me. Like, I have a YouTube channel, for those of you who don't know. It's called With Love, Amelia. You can find me. But it's been such a like awkward process of self-realization to speak and monologue in front of the camera and try to share like genuine ideas in a natural way. So this conversational thing is way easier and way more natural. So we'll see what kind of good stuff vulnerability brings to the surface. I'm sure we won't be disappointed.
I tried to do that, and I don't know where I learned it, but I tried to do that over the years. It didn't start that way, but when I was in ministry and preaching in that other life, tried to become more and more vulnerable. Because at some point, I think I realized in my communication and preaching, so it's not just about pointing the finger at other people. It's what am I going through? Because if I'm real about what I'm going through those messages, then I think people connect to that better, because they realize, oh, well, he's a pastor and he had a horrible day, or he's got problems in his life. Then maybe it's okay for me to have problems too, and I can make it. Whereas, some people gave off the vibe of perfection, and present themselves perfect, so that everybody could live up to this, and that really didn't serve anybody. And so I think I appreciate your vulnerability, and not that I've got it mastered or anything. I'm just saying, over the years, I've had to make myself grow in that, because it felt like it helped people better by being honest about where you're at. Not that everybody needs to know everybody's business.
Right.
There's that place of vulnerability that says, here's my whole life, every dark secret. I remember stories of people in these meetings that would get up and confess their sin to like the whole group of people. And, a guy would get up and say things like, I really wanted to have sex with so-and-so, and I'm repenting of it. And it's, in public, like, dude, you don't have to go there.
Yeah. So do you think that your practice in vulnerability as a pastor more often helped you relate to people, or did you find that it backfires? Because if people are judgmental, you're vulnerable. That's the
risk.
Kind of, that's the risk. And the fear of being vulnerable is that people would misunderstand you or judge you. And it's like, that will always happen.
Right.
For sure. So for you, did it backfire?
I'm sure that it did, but after a few times of going through that, because back then, every Sunday I would preach, there would always be something, no matter what you say, you've got you got those weird things like somebody would come up to me and say, Chuck, I just loved when you talked about XYZ. And I'm thinking in my mind, I never even said XYZ. But they were listening to that vulnerability or that story,
Mhm.
and it applied to their life in a way that in their mind they just went down a rabbit trail of how it applied to their life, and it benefited them. And then there are the other people who would judge it as being not hard enough, not against sin enough, or whatever it might be, and you try to use that as a leverage against me. But
Mhm.
at I don't know where the threshold was, but at some point I was like, this is just, I'm going to be myself. I'm going to try to be authentic, and I'm going to make mistakes. I think learning grace really, the concept of grace really helped me with that. And if people don't like it, that's just where they're at. That doesn't have anything to do with me. That's just their
Right.
response.
Yeah. So cool. Then you can
But the
step
same
up.
thing happens with our kids, right?
In what way?
Being vulnerability with our kids. Because they're knowing,
Mhm.
not being the perfect parent, the expectation sometimes we have of being the perfect parent. And like I've apologized to my kids and asked their forgiveness and stuff before. And then sometimes I've missed those opportunities. But that vulnerability people are afraid of there too.
Yeah.
Yet it's important for that relationship.
Oh yeah, like that's the secret sauce. Is apologizing. I apologize a lot. I have to.
Because
I
I'm a
just
mom
have
of
to.
6.
Yeah, I have to constantly say I'm sorry. So thankfully they're so forgiving, and like kids are really forgiving, probably much more than adults. But
Oh,
um
no,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So tell us, what brings you to the revival, Dr. Chuck Crisco?
What brings us to the revival? Oh, I think we already touched on it. It's just, I've got a I've got a BA in Bible, a Master of Divinity, and a doctoral degree. And at some point, after I was doing missions work in different countries, been all over the world. I've had written books, Christian books, a church planting coach. I did all these things. And the very tools I learned when I was in school, when I began to apply them to studying scripture and, the whole thing, at some point I realized I'm an expert in something I don't believe anymore, because I had the tools to look at this and go, I just don't see this as being true anymore. And so, um, short version, coming through that process, it was, I mean, I understand. I went through the valley. It was kind of a dark place, because even though I preached about identity until till I was in a place where I realized my identity is not in the ministry. It's not as being the pastor. It's not the answer guy, all those things.
Mhm.
When that was taken away, I realized, like, what's left? Who am I? Who is Amelia? Who's Chuck? Who am I?
Mhm.
And it took, meditation, looking at the world from a bigger point of view, and really re-engaging with life with a different framework that, um, revived my life. And so,
Yeah.
and it's still in the process. And so, I think I've got some stories to share. You've got some stories to share of how, how different. I mean, think about topics like, marriage, children, psychedelics,
Mhm.
marijuana, trading,
Yeah.
all these different topics that when you see how, or when I begin to see how truly connected I was with everybody, and how, the whole concept of oneness and,
Mhm.
those kind of things, and the perceived separation that I have with other people,
Mhm.
once that begins to melt away, man, there's a life that is underneath all this that is fun. And,
Yeah,
and so I think some of the stories out of that and some of the insights I think will be encouraging to people.
I agree.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's all of the underneath and the interconnectedness, and which is sort of like what makes living a mindful, conscious, open-hearted life
yeah,
so doable, is that it's not simple because it's all connected.
yeah,
And so like you can start small. You can get momentum in small ways. It doesn't have to be these huge changes, although I would love to do an episode on change and making changes, because sometimes it is. But anyways, yeah, it's that the interconnectedness. Once you just drop that lens of separation and us and them. And so I think for me, in my Christian story, I don't want to get too ahead of the about me episode, but it was never like a rejection of a faith system, but it definitely more of like an expansion where, a lot of the things that I continue to have in my roots come from my experience and my
sure.
walk through Christianity. But I did come out on the other side with a more expanded view of what love means and
Mhm.
what inclusion means, and like all of that stuff, what it just means to be human and have this human experience, that we're all interconnected in one way or another. And it's not beneficial nor helpful to slice it and dice it and cut people out, or all of that. So,
Mhm.
yeah. So,
So, what would you say is your maybe truth that you found that's, and we can expand on it in another episode, but what's the truth that you found that is kind of the catalyst that helps you more than anything else? Like, go
oh,
ahead.
yeah. Oh, yeah. It's the freaking gospel. Um, it is that indeed it is true that Christ is in you, and it is your Shakti, and it's your Chi, and it is your divine. It's my divine feminine. It is the source. It is the force. It is the same thing. It's all of the same, and it truly resides in within me as consciousness. Or there's so many different people having the conversation about the same kind of like inner divinity, and that completely catapulted me, because once you realize like that's there, that you could have access to who you truly are at any given point in time. It starts off a grand adventure. You're no longer trying to pull it in from the outside by your duty or your service or your sacrifice, which, I'm not against any of those things, but it doesn't, I don't have to qualify myself to live a spiritual, connected, vibrant, full of love and light, awakened life. It's just done already. So it's more of a process, rather, of like letting go of things that aren't serving me or that maybe feel a little heavy in my life, rather than constantly trying to import things in
Yeah,
to help me be more spiritual or feel better or be more alive. So,
right.
yeah, that's a good
Absolutely.
question. What about you? What was your truth that
Well,
catapulted?
that was so good. I don't think I need, for me, there's love is a key component of the way I think about the universe, of the way I thought, even in Christianity. But I think it may be, if I was getting it, try to get it, like hone it down even more fundamental, is that you don't have to be afraid of truth. You hit it right on the head. Is that, and you're not going to find, you can find truths out here,
Mm-hmm.
but to know yourself, to know who you really are, to experience your own reality, like who am I without somebody else outside of me telling me who I am, but me discovering it for myself and then living from that place. That is so life-changing and so powerful. And if people can have the courage to not be afraid of the truth of who they really are because they think there's something negative,
Mm-hmm.
if they can discover the truth of who they really are, by experience and not by a Bible story or somebody telling them. And when you know it by your own experience, it's powerful, and it changes
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, I agree. I've had that little musing in my head for a while as I've been in my own process of like uh, when when you're not looking exteriorly at like a religion or a set of shoulds, like I should be this and that because of my role or my, whatever identity I put on because of my job or my career, I should be a certain thing. But when you're just like seeking inwardly to who you are, there you will find God. And when you find God, you also find you. And so turning inwardly to tell yourself the truth is this sort of like chicken and the egg process. It's like, well, what comes first? I discovered me, and I discovered God, and I discovered God, and I also discovered me. And it's this like, whoa type thing where I was really surprised and delighted to discover that because I think before discovering God had absolutely nothing to do with me
Mm.
and who I truly was and my uniqueness. There was a bit of like a separation from that because, God is described to us and laid out for us as being this certain type of deity and entity, and it is up to us to kind of like fit into that paradigm rather than accepting that like the temple is within and that is the like paradigm that God fits into because we are created uniquely according to, I think, a specific design and purpose. And it doesn't have to be God. Like, I would never want to scare anybody off away with that kind of jargon. It can be the universe, it can be, you know, energetic evolution, whatever. I do kind of feel like there's some kind of purpose, though,
Oh, I do too.
divinity within us all. And our uniqueness to me is the testimony of that kind of design because it denotes how grand the universe is, that there's billions of people who are all unique and individual and all have these like lights inside of them and different they're just all different, and it's really amazing that you can get such variety out of kind of like the same bag of bones.
I heard an atheist scientist talk about evolution. So just to kind of um, stay in line with what you were saying, and he was pretty profound what he said. That, and I'm not an atheist, but he said something to the effect of, if evolution is true, if it were true, and we've evolved as the only sentient species that's unique as it is as a human race. People, he said, asked them, "What's the purpose of life?" And he said, "Life is the purpose." Like,
Mm-hmm.
If we're the only ones, then shouldn't we protect and value this thing called life and the uniqueness of what it is, and expand on that to the degree that we can, so that because of the very fact that it's so unique. So I say that to say, no matter what perspective people are coming, whether they're creationist or they're atheist or they're agnostic or they're just don't, they're sort of walking through how this, who knows? But it still comes down to the same thing, which you just said, and that is that there's a sense of purpose that we all have that needs to be celebrated, pulled out of us sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
We can't tell somebody what it is, but we can certainly help pull it out of them.
Mm-hmm.
And which reminds me of the quote, excuse me, which reminds me of the quote, you and I are reading the same book, the which is
Big Magic.
Big Magic, yeah. And she
Elizabeth
quotes,
Gilbert. I highly
yeah,
recommend it.
she quotes the Gospel of Thomas, which says something along the lines of, um, if you bring forth what is within you, then what is within you will save you. But if you don't bring forth what is within you, then what is within you will destroy you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really powerful quote, because if we bring forth this vibe, this life, this thing that's in us, and express that the way it was designed to be expressed, then man, it's life-giving. It changes our lives. It's helpful. It's beneficial. If we stuff that down or just keep negative stuff inside, then it doesn't bring us life. It's destructive. It's
Yeah.
not healing. So I think these conversations are going to help people experience some of that.
Yeah, and me as well, because I think that a lot of my light and purpose has to do with reaching out and being kind of a helper or somebody who comes alongside other people and help them, kind of bring light and help them navigate where they are. And so I know that when I'm not actively engaging with people or like reaching out or just sharing love, like it does feel like it's destroying me, because usually if I'm not out there doing it, then I love to do it. And so the only reason I wouldn't is if I'm struggling with some kind of self-doubt or insecurity or like it's been done or what do I really have to offer kind of thing. And those are very destructive and can put you in like a dark place. So for sure, as I bring it forth and bring it out, it's very life-giving. If I'm not, then I'm just being like kind of pounded by a lot of just self-sabotage ultimately. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Excited to have these conversations. So please join Chuck and I on the revival. We have really exciting things coming up, and you can email us at therevival@gmail.com. And we have a Facebook page called The Revival. Is that correct? And we have an Instagram called The Revival. So follow us along. There's going to be a lot of exciting things happening.
So how do you spell that so people aren't confused?
Yes, The Revival. It's TheRevibal. Be as in be yourself. The Revival. That's a tagline.
You got to get the I and the B now, so we'll have to figure that out for next time.
Yeah, we'll work on that. But anyways, thanks for joining us, and we will be back soon.
All right. Have a good one.